Thank you for joining me. It's good that got people who are following this, and I hope you'll continue to find benefit from these just short talks about Hebrews 11. This is the last one we're going to do on Hebrews 11, verse 11 to 16, but we'll start again next week on verses 17 to 19 after the Sunday broadcast. So yesterday we thought about the way that people died in faith. And once they're ready to die in faith, of course, they're ready to live in faith. And that's what the passage describes them as. So from 11, from verse, let's say verse 13, it says, they admitted they were aliens and strangers on earth. Now, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. The feature there you've got is of their determination to keep going. There's terms like aliens and strangers, living in tents as they did, not thinking of the country they'd left, but looking for a better one. They didn't look back. Now, looking back doesn't have a good record in the Bible. Lot's wife is the classic example of this, and you'll find her in Genesis chapter 19. When the family was told to flee the city of Sodom that was going to be judged by God, um, they fled and were warned not to look back or linger or hang around. Well, she did that, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Now you might wonder, well, what's so deadly about looking back? Well, it's to do with pilgrimage and moving forward in God. You know what you do when you leave a place that you love, somewhere you've found a home and you really want to be there. When you leave it, you look back. That's what she did, because that's where her heart was. It's tragic that her heart was in the wicked, evil city of Sodom, but that's where it was. And she's a warning, Jesus says. Remember Lot's wife. It's significant, therefore, that Abraham and Sarah are described in this passage as not looking back, rather not thinking of where they'd come from, but moving ahead always. And that's a description of the Christian life. Jesus says that you can't put your hand to the plow and look back and be his disciple. But of course, it's hard being an alien and stranger. It's hard to do that. And that's the reason this letter is written. That's why this book we call Hebrews is there, because the readers were finding difficulty and being tempted to look back. They were Jewish and they'd become Christians, and therefore they'd left what they had known beforehand, but they were looking back now. There were difficulties and troubles and perhaps a bit of persecution, and they were beginning to think, well, maybe we should go back to what we had beforehand. They were being enticed by the things they knew from the past, the elements of worship that they'd previously had, the temple, the priests, the sacrifices, those things. But the writer is saying, no, don't go back to those. That's why there's so much detail on them in this letter. It's because I think people are being tempted to go back to that. And he says, no, it's all about Jesus. Jesus fulfills those things, but he's also better than them. So you can't go back to them. That's like leaving behind the best thing. Well, if we're honest, leaving behind the best thing is a temptation we do actually feel. The temptation to give up, abandon, turn back. Actually, I was thinking about the film The Matrix. You either love the film or you hate it. If you've not seen it, don't worry about it. But in The Matrix, there's this team of people and they're betrayed by one of their members. And the reason he betrays them is he's tired of living as an exile. He just wants to go back to the illusion that they had beforehand. He loved what it was, the security, the familiarity. He wanted to go back to it. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul writes about Demas, one of his previous colleagues. And he says, Demas, because he loved this present world, he deserted me. He went back and disappeared. And that's one of the tragedies. And we feel that temptation in our own souls. But of course, true discipleship is about pushing forwards. It's about not looking back. because actually what lies ahead is far better. You can't go back to something that's worse. You're pushing ahead to something that's better. That's how Paul writes about himself and his faith in Philippians chapter 3, from verse 8 onwards. It's an amazing series of statements about his determination to keep going and not go back to what he had beforehand. He refuses to sit back and stagnate. He refuses to slip back. So he says that everything revolves around knowing the Lord Jesus, because nothing can be compared to him. Absolutely nothing. So he counts everything as rubbish, he said. It's quite extreme. It's of almost no value compared to Christ. So I'm going to take hold of Christ. That's the most important thing, to reach out for him. So I want to know him. I want to experience the power of his resurrection. I want to experience even sharing in his sufferings, because actually I want to attain the resurrection of the dead with him. Now he says, I haven't attained to that. I'm not there. I'm not sitting in perfection now. No, I'm going to keep pushing ahead. I'm going to press on. I'm going to forget what's behind, and I'm going to strain out towards what is ahead in order to take hold of the prize which God has called me heavenwards. It's a fantastic series of verses. It's from verse 3, verse 8 through to 14. And there is a prize to be won. That's the point about it. There is something far greater, far better, to know Christ, to see him face to face, to be known fully by him, to know him completely, to be found righteous in him. He's the reward. And what about, actually, I was thinking, what about the blessing that's there in Hebrews 11, in the passage that we read, where it talks about, it says, God is not ashamed to be called their God. When God sees that determination, I think it's a wonderful way of describing how God blesses us. He's not ashamed to be called their God. It's like what Jesus says about the faithful servant. The reward is simply to hear what God says. Well done, good and faithful servant. Now, really, that's worth heading for. That's worth putting everything behind for. That's worth looking ahead for and forgetting what is behind, because in the end, there is nothing better than that. Or may you be able to push on today and over this weekend, persevering in him, reaching out for the reward there is in him. On Sunday, our regular Sunday service at 11 o'clock, we'll be looking at Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 19. And the talks next week will be built on that as well. So we'll see you then.